Well, I didn't make this comment yesterday, and I was saving it for today, but I too want to wish all of you the very best in this competition and work that you're doing right now. The stakes are high, and you're working hard, and you've come a long way, so good luck to everybody on it. And I hope that what I have to say today will be also of help to you in some way. This is all about staying within the box, and I want to talk again about the AIM mission and what we did there. Just for those of you who were not here yesterday, just as a reminder, it's a mission that has 3 instruments: a solar occultation instrument, a nadir imager, and an in situ dust collection instrument. And we're looking at noctilucent clouds. Why do they form and vary? That's the science goal. It was launched in Vandenberg Air Force Base on the Pegasus XL rocket on April 25th of 2007. It's in a near perfect 600-kilometer orbit. Everything is working well. We're getting really new information, great information about the clouds, and we've made a lot of progress now in understanding them, and we're approved right now through 2014. And this is just a picture of the clouds on one day. And we of course get these images every day during the season. So what I want to talk about is experiences during the AIM development that pointed out that sometimes the box becomes quite small and it requires some drastic steps to stay within that box. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. The first wake-up call we got is when we, I think Paul to someone said yesterday, the good news is you were selected, the bad news is you were selected. So when we had the debrief after selection for going into the development, we were told by, I think it was Carlos Diego who wanted to did the briefing. There's a lot of skepticism about cost and schedule. So they're not going to confirm the mission unless you're within the cost and schedule. There wasn't enough schedule reserve. The mass margin was low. That was another question. The SOFI, the occultation instrument maturity was low, and the spacecraft maturity was not good. And they said, but you also have room to descope. So that's where we started out. And after listening to that message, at that point, for me at least, science and cost became of similar importance. We never abandoned science, but the cost sort of came up in my mind as something we really had to pay a lot of attention to. And fast forwarding 2 years, after we were confirmed, and Ed Waller was the AA at the time of the confirmation, I saw him at a meeting after the confirmation review. We were both given a talk to a panel. And I just thanked him for his confidence he placed in the mission and so on, in us being able to do it. He didn't say, I know you'll do a good job or any of those things. I think that was implied in his decision. But what he did say is, and all he said, just bring it in within cost. And so at that point, it was very clear what our plan was. Science, but also you got to have it within the cost. So after that briefing, everything changed for us in terms of our philosophy. We really focused on a lot of introspective thinking about how do we reduce mass, how do we get science, but still reduce the cost and not affect the science significantly. We looked at different spacecraft approaches. We looked at different ways to get into orbit. And as a result, all of those things resulted in a series of actions, and some of them were very drastic, and that's what I want to spend the rest of the time talking about. And before I do, there's one comment I think is so appropriate, and we all know that comment. The best I could determine is attributed to Thomas Jefferson, but he says, I find that the harder I work, the more lucky I get. And that was sort of true for us as we went through this development. So here are the things that we did. And what I'm showing here is, this is what it was at the concept study report. These are items that we changed. These are the changes we made, when we did them, and what it did to us in terms of mass, cost, or volume, data volume, those kinds of things, in terms of saving those resources. So if you look at the first one, the SOFI, the occultation instrument mass, it was 50 kilograms. Right away, we said, we can do better than that. We actually changed the wavelength from the longest wavelength from 9.6 micrometers to 0.3 of a micrometer was the shortest one now, all the way down 0.3 micrometers, and then we went out to 5 micrometers. When we did that, the octave size came way down. Actually, the measurement was better because we have more sensitive detectors for ozone in that case we were trying to measure. So that was a great change. For the CSR, it was a first built spacecraft, hadn't been built before. We actually ended up using a 5th generation spacecraft. That was a very good decision, and I'll say more about. This decision, there were 4 science instruments in the CSR. We removed 1 instrument as a result of this activity. Now, I just have to pause for a minute and say that is a very painful decision. It's a lot easier when headquarters makes a decision like that than when a PI makes a decision and a colleague is the one that's affected. And I can say after many years now, the PI who's also in this room for this instrument smiles at me now when he talks. But it was a tough thing to do, but it had to be done, and we all in the end agreed that it did. We had an instrument platform assembly. We removed that. We didn't need that. That saved some mass and cost. This is one of those cases where the harder I work, the luckier I get. We had a new launch vehicle contract going into the CSR. Well, we were able to use, for various reasons, an existing contract, and that saved us money. The cosmic dust instrument, was a new development. We decided to use a copy of New Horizon instrument. That saved money. There were 6 imagers to get the images I showed you before. We reduced that to 4, and that really didn't impact science very much at all. And the next thing that we did, and did this just before confirmation, I made the decision to delete the Pegasus hydrogen-assisted propulsion system that's used to trim the orbit. We saved over $1 million by removing that capability. We got into a perfect orbit. It's only 5 kilometers out of Circa, which is we wanted. And we wanted to be at 600, and it's right at 600. And we wanted to cross the time at the equator of 12:30. When we crossed the equator, we were only 30 seconds off. It was perfect. The harder I work, the luckier I get was the case on that one for sure. So all in all, we ended up saving almost $11 million and 61 kilograms in that activity. A lot of painful things. Some of them weren't so painful, but they all worked together. But just to say a little more about the things that we did, we were actually pursued 2 different spacecraft alternatives. One we were pursuing was to use a vegetation canopy LiDAR spacecraft that was in wrap and purge at Orbital Sciences Corporation. That was available, had no planned mission for it. We were looking at that. We also began to pursue another option with the 5th generation spacecraft I mentioned earlier. I really wanted to use the Minotaur launch vehicle, and I pursued that from November of 2002 to June of 2003 because, again, it was about a $5 million savings, but it was too early in the agency and to use the Minotaur, and it was a great vehicle, but I at the end, that was the time to stop, so I did. We had to replace in the occultation instrument a steering mirror with a rigid mirror, and I'll say more about that. This had nothing to do with saving money, but it was a very faithful decision. We replaced the baseline gyros with more capable units. So when we went from a system where the occultation instrument mirror was articulated, moving to track the sun, to a rigid mirror, very good gyros really helped us tremendously. So that was a great decision. Again, the harder I work, the luckier I get is what that was. So I want to talk just about these 2 things here, including all this, the spacecraft alternative and what we did and how, and then the steering mirror. So with regard to the Sophie, or to the AIM spacecraft, I said we were pursuing more than one option. Just after we had the selection debrief, we had a science team meeting at NRL, Naval Research Laboratory. At that meeting, I got the news that ball had gone up in mass on the spacecraft and the cost had gone up. So just after that meeting, I asked the ball VP to conduct a detailed review of the spacecraft and its cost and the development issues. At the same time, the project manager for AIM, a wonderful person and a very competent person, Mike McGrath, who is also the chief engineer at LASP, talked about the possibility of a fifth generation, been flown 4 times, spacecraft. And I asked him to go ahead and let's start investigating that vigorously. So we had those two things going. In May of '03, we ended up funding Orbital Sciences to do a detailed feasibility study of 2 things. The vegetation canopy LiDAR spacecraft that was just sitting there without any use for it, and also what was called their Leo Star bus, which is a source follow-on. At the same time, I was working with NASA headquarters with the help of Vicki Ellsbury, who was a program executive, but I was actually working on the Earth Sciences side. Mike Luther, I think was a deputy at that time to Gautam Asrar, to try to get permission to use the VCL bus. It was built. It had hydrogen controls, so we controlled the altitude and so on of the bus. So I did that from right around the same time we started with the looking at the other option, and from then until 2003. But in the end, Code Y, it was called at that time, would not commit to provide the VCL bus, so that option went away. We had another, at this time now, ball review in May of '03, and after that briefing, it was not good feelings in terms of where they were in cost of the bus and also mass. And I also got a briefing from Orbital on a source-like spacecraft. And that result was I changed the spacecraft vendor in June of that year. Now, I just want to tell you one quick thing about that decision and the way that worked. Because I went to the Orbital Vice President, Jerry Chodel, at the time. I told him what I was thinking. He said, well, before you go any further with that, I would like you to call these 3 people. There were 3 previous customers. And so I did. And he said, find out what they say about us and what we've done with new spacecraft and with existing spacecraft. And I did all that, and I got good results in talking to them, but I also knew that the right thing to do was to change the spacecraft. So I went back to Jerry and said, I've done this, but I still feel like now it's the right thing to do is just go to a different spacecraft. He said, why do you want to do that? I said, because I have looked at it and I've determined that the greatest chance I have to get confirmed for this mission is to go to a bus that's already been built before. The risk is low, and the cost estimate can be very good. He says, that's the reason you want to do it. I said, yes. He said, I totally agree with you. And that was it. And, you think about it, just like NRL with the instrument we had to take off, and Jerry Chodel, they had been with us for this mission the whole time, right from the pre-phase A into phase A. But that was his decision, and there was no more said about it, and we made the switch. So that was a great example of very hard cooperation on the part of Ball. Now, the last thing we did, this is a steering mirror. We've changed from a movable mirror to track the sun to a rigid mirror. But here's the system. This is the occultation instrument. This is the cover on the door. This is the optical head over here. See how the door is open. Sun comes in, reflects off of this steering mirror assembly. It moves, and you can track the sun, move it azimuthally as well. And here's the steering mirror assembly. You remember from my talk yesterday, I was talking about concerns about changing launch vehicle loads all the way through, right from the beginning, right until the point that almost the point when we launched the mission. The steering mirror assembly, these things here are actuators, and they just push back and forth to change the mirror location both ways, azimuth and elevation. And we were concerned by the high launch loads about this breaking, and so we were always concerned about that. And because of that concern, we were developing options along the way. And this is one of the messages I think in staying in the box is to start looking at alternatives, as I was for the spacecraft and for the rocket, is to look at other ways of getting this job done. So we had concerns about this steering mirror assembly. about the bonding to the backside of the mirror. We built a ghost assembly by the vendor, and also a target team of people at Goddard, asked by the Explorers Project Office. They started looking at it with us. And at the same time, we, from the science side, started looking at a rigid mirror backup approach using the spacecraft to point the instrument at the sun. And we did a very detailed study on that. We purchased a rigid mirror, and we already integrated and tested early in the SOFA development just because it wasn't that expensive. It was a good way to spend reserve, and we had it on the shelf if we needed it. And also we could use it in engineering testing, so it had all good things. Well, in the end, with the detailed science analysis that were conducted, it was clear that a rigid mirror approach was considered acceptable, although it wasn't the ideal thing. So there were 4 options that we looked at, because what happened when we vibrated the observatory, you may remember from yesterday, just as we went into the pre-environmental readiness review, we got a call from Kennedy that said, I'm sorry, but the loads have gone up again. We went ahead with the observatory vibration for various reasons I mentioned yesterday. And during this case, and during this time, we broke the steering mirror assembly. This was only 5 months before launch, and planned launch. So there were 4 options. We could repair the steering mirror assembly. That wasn't a good option because we'd probably break again. It was other things we were concerned about that hadn't gone away. We could replace it with a redesigned system. No time to do that. We could implement a caging mechanism, which we should have done in the beginning, but we didn't. There was no time to do that. So the only real option was to move the articulating mirror with a rigid mirror mount and rely on that on the spacecraft to do the pointing. Because we'd done the groundwork before, at this point in time, this was not a hard decision to make. We had a lot of questions to answer from people, but it was clear that was the right decision. So that was 5 months before the original launch. We actually launched 10 months after this anomaly. So we were able to recover well because of that preparation and the luck that came along with it. So we replaced the steering mirror assembly in July of 2006, and the message was always be prepared with a carefully considered backup plan, deep scope plan when there's unforeseen options. So kind of to summarize what we've learned here, the main point was, first thing, and I didn't say this in the beginning and I should have, recognize the wisdom and advice of the technical management and cost panel. Whatever they told you in your debrief, you should pay real close attention to it, because it's a group of experts who spent a lot of time very carefully in great detail reviewing all aspects of that mission. And that was an important lesson for us. Cost is very important. Science is important, but they have to be very carefully considered together. Have a good knowledge of the requirements, and I didn't say this in the talk, but we nailed down the science requirements right in the beginning of the Phase A concept study. What I mean nail them down, they became sacrosanct. We wrote a science requirements document that flowed to the mission requirements document, and they were not changed within a couple of months of the start of the concept study. They never changed again throughout the whole mission. Anticipate problems before they occur, look at backup approaches and workarounds, don't ever stop doing that. This decision, at any point in time, if any of those decisions were delayed, we wouldn't have launched when we did, we would have not been able to stay within our costs. And of course, the bottom line is this: we should never do. So thank you very much.